consultant on innovation, entrepreneurship, venture capital, technology transfer. She is frequently invited speaker to various prestigious international forums. And she's a long-standing advocate. She works on gender.
It's fine, we can use this.
She's a proponent chair of her Directors Leading Change, a forum comprising top 250 female board members in Israel working to achieve gender equity in boards and in top management. She is often quoted on innovation models, including the best-selling book Startup Nation, and she speaks about Israeli innovation on behalf of the Foreign Ministry. So, without much delay, I will now hand it over to Nava. She will be doing the keynote for 30 minutes. Post that, she and Kanika will be having an interaction, a kind of a question-answer session to take the conversation forward.
Bit quicker than usual, so you can ask questions, and also if anything comes to mind that you want to ask while I'm speaking, raise your hand high enough for me to see, and I'll try and answer. But really, you know who I am, so I can skip this, and I'm sure you've had bios, backgrounds, what have you, what have you. And I'm going to start with a question, okay? I don't know if anyone has seen this picture. It's become quite a famous picture in Israel. What you see in this picture is, this is the surface of the moon. This is a selfie taken from inside a spacecraft called Bereshit, which in English means Genesis, like the book of Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, which was built by a group of Israeli entrepreneurs as part of the Google X Prize competition for private groups from around the world to build a spacecraft that would go to the moon. You've heard of that? It was a few years back. There were groups all over the world that started out. The Israeli group of 3 young guys was one of them. At the deadline, nobody had succeeded in sending a spacecraft to the moon, but the Israeli group persisted. And in February of 2019, they launched, from Florida actually, they launched the spacecraft that was built in collaboration. It's a lovely story, but that's a whole different 1-hour lecture in and of itself, which we don't have time for today. And this is the last selfie sent before reaching the surface of the moon. You can see the Israeli flag here. Underneath it says, Am Israel Chai, the people of Israel live. Underneath, I think you can read, it says, small country, big dreams, Space IL, which is the name of the group, and IAI, Israel Aerospace Industries, which helped them with the final launch. This is a few hundred meters from the surface of the moon. It is the last communication. We all got up 2 o'clock in the morning to watch this thing land on the moon. We saw this, live TV, and that was it. It crashed. Almost at the moon, excuse me. I'm going to take this beautiful scarf off so that I don't ruin it, because it's getting stuck in my bracelets. So, by the way, this very beautiful scarf was given to me just now by Anjali and Harit, and it is handmade. And Anjali has a small fashion business who makes partly these things. That they know. That they know. Okay, so let's go back to the moon. We're on the moon, okay? Now here's my question to you. Is this a success or a failure? You work for years, you get past the deadline, you still persist, you almost make it to the moon, and you crash, almost at the surface. We'll get back to it. But think about it. Israel today is one of the most developed economies in the world, a full member of the OECD, high growth, high GDP per capita. We're doing well, okay? I'm skipping through this because it's not very interesting, but it gives you a picture of where we are now. The reason I put this up is because one of the ways we got there was through a very, very successful tech ecosystem that has developed in Israel in recent decades. And the story of this innovation ecosystem is very well told in this book. Has anyone read it? Has anyone seen it? Startup Nation, that's also where the name comes from, which we use now, all of us, very happily, because it's a very good name, let's face it. A book written by two journalists from the US, in which I have the honor of being quoted a few times. And they tried to tell the story of how Israel went from being a new country, a small corner of the Middle East, with no natural resources, no water, 600,000 people when it was founded in 1948, to an innovation superpower on a global scale and a very well-developed economy, as you've seen before. It's a good read, by the way. You might want to look for it. It is available here in India as well. Some of the many technologies developed in Israel over the years, many of them you use every day. Anyone still use voicemail? You used to use voicemail. We all used to use voicemail. Israeli technology. You have a computer. Your computer has a firewall. Israeli technology. You eat cherry tomatoes? Peppers? Instant messaging. Everybody uses instant messaging. The very first one was ICQ. It was sold to AOL almost 20 years ago. That was the very first one. If someone in your family is unfortunate enough to have multiple sclerosis, they are most likely taking a medication invented and developed in Israel. Some of these here. Cancer medications, many other things. Drip irrigation, of course, which is quite well known in India as well. Driver assist and autonomous vehicle systems, many more. So there's a lot of technology that you don't even know, and I call it Israel Inside, like Intel Inside, because really very often people don't know it comes from Israel. Memory sticks, like that one right there with my presentation on it. Flash memory, developed at Tel Aviv University. Again, many others. Some of the Intel chips, a lot of the Microsoft new technologies, and so on and so forth. And here in a nutshell, really in a nutshell, 2022 figures from the Israel Innovation Authority, that's the government agency that deals with innovation and R&D. 10% of the workforce in Israel works in the high-tech industry, okay? It's the first year that we've crossed the 10% threshold. It was 8-9% this year. For the first time, 10.1% of the entire workforce. However, we pay 25% of the income tax in the country. 43% of exports. 40% of the value of companies traded on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. And 15% of overall GDP for the country comes from this one sector that employs 10% of the workforce. That's why you keep on hearing about the Israeli innovation ecosystem. It's really, at the end of the day, because of these numbers. Because when you succeed in developing a successful innovation ecosystem in a country or a region or a state or a company, this is what you can expect in terms of economic growth and in terms of contribution to the well-being of the country. But I am very sad to say that it is still an industry of white men. I see your smiles. I know, everywhere in the world. And in the case of Israel, it's white Jewish men, because the majority of the population in Israel is Jewish, 80%. But look at this, it's not a very good slide. I took it from the Innovation Authority. I would have presented it differently, but the message is clear. This is men and this is women, okay? This purple is Jewish, non-Orthodox men, and this is also non-Orthodox women. The blue line is the ultra-Orthodox. 10% of the Israeli population is very religious. Those are the people you see in the pictures with the black clothes and the beards, and so they're 10% of the population. And 20% of the population in Israel is Arab. both Muslim and Christian Arab population, and they are here, this little line here at the bottom. So as you can see, there are 2.3 men for every woman in the tech industry, less than 1/3 are women, and within both groups, there is very little representation for these very big minorities. Women are not a minority. I don't count women as minorities. But both the ultra-Orthodox, the Arab population, as well as 51% of the population in women, not well enough represented in this tech industry. This is only for the tech sector. What that means is that if we want to continue to grow, all of these groups have to become part of the ecosystem. And the obvious one, of course, is women, because we're not a minority, but the other groups too can be helped into this industry, both for their own personal growth and well-being and welfare, and for the country and the industry as a whole. Now, at a glance, this is very hard to read from the back, so I'm just going to give you a couple of figures, because some of this will come back later. You're looking at roughly 7,000 companies. Every year, a few hundred companies are born and a few hundred companies die. So between 6,000 and 7,000 companies for the last 15 years, for sure. You're looking at mostly early stage. This is bootstrapped. This is early stage funding. And this is everything from the A round through to the dark one here is revenue. So a lot of new companies, a lot of new blood all the time. But you can also see it here. This is the stages of product development, okay, the product stage. And mostly the biggest number of companies are in the beta phase, okay? Not terribly early, but not yet well enough advanced. Of course, the numbers of companies go down, the value goes up, so it depends on what you look at. But it's a sign of a vibrant system. There's a lot of new stuff happening all the time, and from the little I've seen in the different regions of India that I have had the pleasure of visiting, I see a similar pattern here in the sense there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of new stuff happening, accelerators, incubators, universities, and so it's a very vibrant tech ecosystem. This is a snapshot over 11 years, so the last decade more or less, which is worthwhile to look at simply because it gives you more than, 1 year is always a difficult snapshot to look at. You see some of the numbers, and the numbers are very, very big. Okay, and most importantly, you're looking again, I said, around 11,000 startups, so that includes those that died and the others, over the years. You're looking at, again, over $65 billion invested, and almost $19 billion raised by venture capital funds active in Israel. We'll talk about that for a minute. Exits, $122 billion in both M&A and IPO, so companies sold, companies going public, a lot of them in the US. Israel is the second largest source of companies traded on the US stock market after American companies. Some of these numbers we'll get to in just a moment. So you're looking at a happening system. And you have to remember this is in a country that's half the size of Delhi in terms of its population, and not a whole lot bigger in terms of its size. I mean, we really are very, very small, physically a very, very small country. 2021 was an amazing year for the tech industry around the world. We're not special. It was an amazing year for Israeli tech as well. And here you see, this is the investments, okay? So we've gone from, growing very nicely. This is 7.8 billion, 10.4 billion to, remember, almost 26 billion in 2021. Here you see the blue line is the average size of the deals, again, from 20 to 21, huge jump. Here you see the median size, a jump that's a bit smaller, but still very big. So it was a great year for us. The question, of course, after a great year is what happens the year after. This is what happened in the first half of 2022. A drop in Israel, in Silicon Valley, everywhere around the world. But if you take a trajectory from 2017, year on year, first half, okay? And if you made a straight line from here, we're on track. Okay, yes, we've had an outlier. Yes, we've had a drop. It's always a question of what you look at, right? If you look at the drop, yes, big drop. But if you look at year-on-year growth, it's all right. And we maintained our global position, which you'd be interested to know is right behind India in terms of the size of the tech market. US, China, UK, India, Israel, so number 5 largest tech ecosystem. When you think of the relative sizes of the countries, it's quite flattering to tiny Israel. And if you look at Q3, so the third quarter, the quarter ending in, 2 months ago, the end of September, which is the last quarter we have figures for. This in the middle, in the light green, is the number of funding rounds over $100 million US. The dark green is the amount of money raised, okay? And this is the third quarter of 2020, the third quarter of 2021, and the third quarter of 2022. And so again, you're seeing more or less a return to the same numbers. This, I don't think, is going to repeat itself in the foreseeable future unless we have another global pandemic and we all move again to some other form of electronic communication and go wild with IPOs. Can't see that happening in the foreseeable future, but I'll be very happy to see that growth trajectory that I showed you 2 slides ago. Now, what do we have in the system? What do we have? We have 8 components that make up something that works together, okay? We have an entrepreneurial culture. I'll tell you just a little more about that at the end. We have incubators and accelerators. We have very strong academic research and a relatively good system of commercializing that research, which is, it's not enough to have good research. Most of the technologies I showed you on that Israel Inside slide came out of academic research. The autonomous vehicles and the flash memory and all the medications and the cherry tomatoes and even the drip irrigation, most of them, because powerful academic research, when properly commercialized, is a very, very strong driver of innovation. We're looking at corporate spin-offs and R&D centers, roughly close to 400, all the big multinationals, and in recent years, all the big Indian companies as well, Tata, Mahindra, Reliance, they've all opened R&D centers in Israel. Some of them have acquired companies, many of them have made investments. All the big tech names, they're all in Israel. Sometimes they opened their own facility because they want access to the innovation ecosystem. Sometimes they came in via acquisition, but they're all there. We have a relatively supportive government that does the things it's supposed to do, which is 2 things, right? What does government do? It regulates. It imposes taxes, that's true, but second thing I was referring to is policy, okay? Policy and regulation. We need both policy and regulation, not too much, but to create a system that works, okay? We have today very experienced entrepreneurs who are coming back 2nd, 3rd, 4th time. People want to work with them, investors want to invest in them, companies want to do business with them. That's a very, very powerful growth engine. You see that in most successful innovation ecosystems around the world. We have money. That's why it's green. We have money. We have a vibrant venture capital system. I'll show you a few figures. And we have something that nobody else has, which is universal conscription, military service, men and women. When you go to college, we go to the army. For a minimum of 2 years for women, 3 years for men, longer if you're an officer, even longer if you're in whatever special positions. That does two things, the military. The one thing is we develop technologies. We develop technologies because we need them. You know, we're not popular in the neighborhood. We live in a difficult neighborhood. And when you live in a difficult neighborhood, you develop techniques to defend yourself, and you develop products to defend yourself and the right technologies. So a lot of those technologies have then been repurposed to use for non-military applications. A lot of medical technologies, for example. A lot of security, cybersecurity technologies. One of my favorite medical technologies is the pill cam. It was on that slide. The pill cam is a pill, a capsule about the size of a large antibiotic capsule. And inside that capsule is a very tiny camera. That tiny camera was developed for a missile head, because, you know, missiles need to see where they're going. That you can swallow for medical imaging purposes, and it works very nicely. It's not new, it's been around for over 15 years, but it's a beautiful example of how you can take a technology that no one would have thought would have gone that way and turned it into something very, very useful for human health. So that's one thing. The other thing is, because we all go to the army, we develop personal and interpersonal skill sets at a very young age. Firstly, you grow up. Believe you me, I know this for myself, and I now also know this as a mother. You know, suddenly, well, you know, you grow up because you have responsibility, because you have to work in a team, because you have to find solutions, because you can't call someone to do it for you. No, I'm not there. And very often, these groups of people come out, even if they've not worked on a technical solution. And there are many examples of people who've worked on a technical solution and then gone out to found a company, like, for example, Checkpoint, the company that developed the firewalls. They worked together in the military, developing the early versions of that, and then they left and they founded a company, and they still, one of them still runs it 25 years later. But the second thing is just those personal skills. Think of yourselves. Think of how much more mature you were when you graduated from college, from university, vis-a-vis, you know, when you first went in. So we come out with those personal skill sets. And after we've taken a year off and traveled in India, right? Because lots of Israeli backpackers, because they need to clear their heads. Then they go to university, they're older, they're more mature, they're more focused because they're older and more mature and they don't have the time to spend, but they already have the skill set that very often leads to the creation of a company, finding the solutions. Now again, I'm not saying you should do it here, because it is, you know, it's a different country, it's a different environment, but it's a fact, it's something that came out of a difficult situation and has turned into an advantage when it comes to innovation. Very, very briefly, we invest more in R&D as a percentage of GDP than any other country in the world. In fact, the current number for this year, this was the latest that I had, but the newest number is over 5%. The average of the OECD, the most developed countries in the world, is 2.4% of GDP. So over 5%, it just means we're putting more money into R&D, which gives us big strengths. I'm going to skip this in the interest of having a little more time for your questions. We are a global leader in venture capital. Remember that green box? It's moved. It's mirrored here for some reason. But we spend, now remember, 9 million people, right? We love per capita figures in Israel. Anything divided by 9 million is always a much bigger number than if it's divided by 1.3 or 1.4 billion, or even if it's divided by 60 or 100 million for most other European countries or Japan or whatever. So per capita, this is venture investment per capita. This is Israel at $415 per capita. This is the US, okay? This is Sweden, another small country, even smaller than Israel. UK, France, Germany, China in the red there. So even not per capita, though, it's a very big number. This is not per capita. This is actual dollars. going from left to right, that is North America, the US and Canada. So left to right on each one. These are the years, okay, by quarter. North America, Asia, Europe, Israel. Absolute dollar terms are very, very big numbers. All it says is the money's coming in because it can make money. VCs invest where they can make money. Very, very simple. Easiest equation in the world. The second thing it says is that the ecosystem has fuel because you need money to fuel the growth of startups. They don't grow alone. If you look at where the money's going, this is Q1 22, the most recent figures that I had, but it varies a little. What you can see, the relative size of the circle is the amount invested. So the big one in the middle, 1.73 billion in the first quarter, is enterprise software, IT, data sciences, which of course we all know is heavily growing. And this one is security. Again, something you'd expect in Israel, cybersecurity, security. But this is fintech, okay? And this is life sciences. And this is agri-food, agricultural technologies and food tech. And this is smart mobility, and so on and so forth. So we've got a very broad range. And the size of these circles changes, you know, a bit like those screensavers with the balls. Okay. It happens with the size, the relative size, according to what's growing and what's important in the world. But we see that we're getting to a very good balance. Lots of unicorns, okay? These are unicorns founded by Israeli founders. Less than half of them, about a third of them, are based in Israel. The others are based mostly in the US. But you're going to like this next one. If you look at US-based unicorns, you'll see two very interesting things. The one thing you'll see is that almost half of the founders were not born in the US. Interesting. Why? Because we're immigrants, right? We try harder. That's always true of immigrants. And where do they come from? They come from India, the largest number. And look at this. Israel. And then lots of other countries. Canada, which you'd expect to see more because, you know, across the border. UK, China, and so on. This one I think you can see from the back of the room. So again, we're exporting that skill set. We're taking it to other parts of the world, and we're seeing, alongside our Indian friends, a lot of success. New unicorns, 2022 after the Big Bang. Again, Israel, number 2 after the US in the creation of new unicorns. Moving on very briefly, because I want to have time to speak with you. I mentioned that all the big multinationals are in Israel. This is not a complete list. It's just a nice looking slide that I put together with lots of logos. They're all true, but there are many more that are not on the slide. The interesting thing is this. They employ a small number of people, but they have a very, very big impact on the local economy. They buy companies. When they buy companies, they train people, okay? Usually, if you buy a startup, if you're a corporate and you buy a startup, you insist that the founders stay for usually 2 or 3 years. Then maybe they leave and they start another company. We talked about that. But meanwhile, that whole contribution, which is very, very hard to quantify in terms of what they do in business, we know. But what they do in training and in the flow of ideas and the flow of people and the understanding of the market, okay? Because they know what the market wants better than many of the startups. That's terribly important. We have also, today, over 350 incubators and accelerators, again, like the one we're in, want to give their graduates and their faculty that next stage. VCs and investors, so incubators and accelerators that operate essentially as feeders for the early stage funds, so they get involved early on and they can select what they want. Fun fact, the incubators started out as nothing to do with innovation. Nothing at all. About 30 years ago, the demise of the Soviet Union, remember? Israel at the time had 5 million inhabitants. 1 million people came to Israel from the former Soviet republics in a very short time frame, about a year. You cannot create jobs for 1 million people in a 5 million person country in a year. It's not possible. So one of the job creation schemes that was put together was incubators. Most of the people who came were very highly educated. Engineers, doctors, scientists. So the thought was, okay, we'll give them a bit of money, 2 years, and let them hopefully create a company that will provide a job for themselves and hopefully maybe for a few others. That's how this all started. And in fact, when the immigration wave receded, there was a very strong push to stop this, because why should we spend money on this? They're here, there are not that many people coming, and let them work in the regular economy. And luckily it wasn't stopped. What did happen is the government privatized the ownership of the incubators. So today the government supports the programs, but not the structures, okay? So if I have an idea, I get accepted at an incubator, then I apply for funding from the government for up to 85% for 2 to 3 years, and it's still a very successful program, but it's not run by the government, it's run by private companies. A lot of multinationals got involved, because it's a good way to see what's happening in Israel with not a large amount of investment, and we've moved on from there. I mentioned academic research and commercialization. Suffice it to say these 2 things about this slide. Number one, we've been doing it for longer than any other country in the world. We started in 1959, and just to put it in perspective, the Bayh-Dole Act, which is the legal foundation for tech transfer in the United States, was enacted in 1980. So we had a head start. And number 2, we've made a fair amount of money over the years, and we continue to do that, but the money is the smaller part. The bigger part is that you're taking this research and turning it into products in the real world. I think that's the most important thing. Smart government intervention, I mentioned before, regulation and policy, right? So regulation and policy, I didn't tell you this story. This is a really nice story, because the venture industry was also created. All those big numbers, they started with $100 million, around the same time as the incubators, by the way, just a little before. That was put to work in a series of 10 funds initially, and from there grew into what it is now. The government moved out long time ago. Incubators I've mentioned. We have programs that support industry, academia, commercialization, and evolving policies that change over time to support the new waves of technology. So it can be bringing in multinationals, it can be nanotechnology 15 years ago, it can be artificial intelligence 5 years ago, or today it's quantum computing. So that's where you do need government support, because we're not yet at the point where venture capital will go into these fields. It's not yet clear how you're going to make money. So that's where you need the support of the government. After that, you don't want them involved. So I'm going back to the beginning. Remember that one? That's, by the way, what it looked like from the outside. Cute as hell. Doesn't look like a spaceship to me, but hey, it's really very cute. I saw a model of it, and it was really very, very cute. We have grown through successive failures as a nation, as an ecosystem, and I think we all know that as people as well. We grow from our failures. We don't enjoy them, but we grow them. And this, some of you in the back heard me say this yesterday, one of my favorite all-time quotes, Samuel Beckett, ever tried, ever fail, no matter, try again, fail better. Because by the time you have failed as a nation or as an ecosystem, you have developed skill sets. It's true as people as well. Whether it's a fighter jet program that was very unique, that was discontinued, but all the people who were trained, thousands of engineers, big numbers for Israel at the time, who went in to create the first wave of electro-optics and communications companies in the 90s, whether it's the very, very first initiative in electric vehicles and battery technology that failed spectacularly. They raised hundreds of millions of dollars, really quite a spectacular failure, but created the auto tech industry. And if you remember smart mobility, one of those circles, it all stems out of that, because we didn't have any of that before. We don't have a car industry in Israel. We don't make cars. And now, not surprisingly, we're seeing flourishing technologies stemming from the research that went into creating the Bereshit spacecraft, the space missions, and it's everything. It's not just actual technology to fly satellites, okay? It's satellite-based technology. It's using space in agriculture and in pharmaceuticals. It's a whole range of things that come from the thought, the idea that we can get to space and we have the technology to do things around that. What they also did, which I think everyone in this room will appreciate, the nonprofit foundation that created this vehicle still has today a very, very extensive education program. And it starts with kindergartens and right up to students, and they have volunteers who go around and give lectures and explain and visits, and so you're really involving a much bigger part of the population in this. I think we all have this dream of touching the moon, right? So it's, very human, and to me personally extremely exciting. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening. There is also now, they're busy building Bereshit 2, which is supposed to launch in 2025. So what makes us tick? You can't read this from the back, I know, I'm sorry. But if you ask people what makes Israelis tick, I think that you get a pretty good answer here. But at the end of the day, it's a very entrepreneurial DNA. We ask questions, we find solutions, we knock on every door, we don't let things just happen. We usually don't take no for an answer. Sometimes that's very annoying, especially if it's your kids. But as a national characteristic, it makes us very entrepreneurial and often very successful, okay? And it's a combination of ambition and courage and sometimes a little bit of stupidity, in the sense that you kind of persist with something and you follow your dreams. Very often you'll get somewhere. I end with two very different things on the spectrum of innovation that I've been involved in personally in recent years. This first one is innovation, the very, very first accelerator in a military setting. This is the Israeli Air Force. That's me up there giving the opening speech 5-6 years ago, okay? And we have today an incubator, a little high-tech incubator with bubble chairs in red, blue, and green, and it looks like this, and it's inside a military base, and it's doing wonderful, wonderful things with integrated teams, and they're learning, and they're doing this, as you can see, height of COVID, we're all wearing masks. That was the sort of Shark Tank, and this is the inauguration of the actual building. So all very, very exciting. And the second, the other side of the spectrum, music. Innovation in music. Music tech, the very, very first program in Israel, which I head, and the very first hackathon. And I'm very proud to say that the winners of the first hackathon have received funding from the Israeli Council for Higher Education, and they're developing their startup, and they're about to start a pilot project in the Philippines, of all places. I think just because it's a nice location, but I don't get involved. So they got the funding, they can decide. And so you see that this essence, it works across the spectrum of every industry. It's not just telecom and life sciences and agriculture. So in a nutshell, if you don't have your own startup, you advise other startups on how to start up, right? And now I'll take questions. Thank you.
But because we're all women entrepreneurs here, okay, so you and I both have had European degrees. I'm going to start off from that actually. So a lot of these big fancy Ivy League schools talk about the fact that about, I think, 35% of their entire composition is made up of women entrepreneurs.
You wish. When I went to business school, there were 62 of us in the MBA program, and of the 62, we were 9 women. So the world is evolved if we've gotten to 25%. Actually, I was there last month, and they were very proud to tell me that they're, approaching parity.
Yeah, yeah. But having said that, the number of women CEOs in like Fortune 500 companies is less than 2%.
True.
In fact, in India itself, only 1.5% of all founders that get funded are women.
I think that's very complex. And we are all dealing with the same issues. We're dealing with them in Israel, in Europe, in the US, in India. We're not there yet. We all know the numbers.
Yeah.
I'm very active with women on boards and C-level positions, and I chair a pro bono organization, Directors Leading Change, with almost 300 women board members in the largest corporations in Israel, government-owned and publicly traded companies. And at the end of the day, we're still inching our way forward. I personally believe that in order to make a real change, it'll come, from two places. One is, sadly, regulation. And I say sadly because I'd love to see a free market change, but it won't happen on its own. It's happening too slowly. So one is regulation. And most countries in the world today, India included, have regulation that mandates a certain number or a certain percentage of women on boards. Because if you start at the top, hopefully you're going to trickle down into management and other areas. Some countries have regulation as to management, C-level positions, certain percentages, and so on. The most recent development, just a couple of weeks ago, which is a very big development, is the EU. But we got there. And it's true, it only starts in 2026, and it only applies to companies that have at least 250 employees, but it's a start, and it's a very important start. NASDAQ has new rules as of 2 years ago that pertain to women on boards. The UK, again, similar rules. They don't like rules. They like to do things, by agreement. But they actually have rules. Many other countries, Australia, New Zealand, we're getting there. So that's one thing. One thing is regulation. It won't happen on its own. And of course, the flip side of regulation is it needs to be enforced. It's nice if you have regulation, but if it's not enforced, and I know that's been the case in India, then, you haven't really done anything. But the second thing, and that's a little bit trickier, is you need active institutional investors, okay? That's where the big, big, big money is. And if the very, very big money managers in the world start looking at the gender composition of managements and boards as part of ESG or as an item in and of itself, and some of them are starting. I've spoken to BlackRock and other of the very big global investors. If they insist on that, if they do not invest in companies that don't at least take the relevant steps to gender parity, then they've got even bigger power than regulators because, money speaks the loudest. And I think those are the two things that need to happen. So the two things need to happen: regulation on a national level, but the power of the big institutional investors, the big money managers globally, that'll make a very big difference. The diverse companies with diverse boards and diverse management teams have better financial results. So at the end of the day, you're just being stupid. If your entire board and management is made up of, whatever the majority of the population is, men, okay? Because you're missing out. You're missing out on the financial benefits, share price performance, profits. Everything is higher in diverse companies, and that's probably because they look at different indicators, and also because of the very simple fact that, as I said, we discussed this yesterday, if you're looking to hire the best person for the job, does it make sense to hire that best person from a pool that is 50% the size of the potential pool? You're missing out on 50% of the talent. It makes no sense.
But, regulation is one part of it. There's the other part of it, right? And before you actually got to this making the statement, which I found very interesting, when he said it's all about we as women entrepreneurs, and I think there are a handful of budding entrepreneurs in this room, what can we do as to how we? I think it's a lot to do with how we view ourselves and how we view ourselves is what the world reflects back. That's what I believe in.
Well, you know, I agree with you, of course, because what we reflect is reflected back at us, right? If I walk down the street and I smile at you, you'll smile back. It works, by the way. It's a very good way. It's a very good way to make yourself feel better on a bad day. Try it. It's very good. But the reason I'm a little uncomfortable is this. This is a very personal view. I don't like all these programs that tell women that they have to fix themselves in order to succeed. Okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with us. I think that the deck is stacked against us. I think that we need to change the rules of the game. But when I see programs that train women, you know, now in Israel it's very popular, there are all these programs to train women to be CEOs. I don't know a single male CEO, a single man who went to school to become a CEO, okay? He didn't do a CEO course. I became a CEO without doing a CEO course, okay? We can all do that. And when you offer these programs, the intention is good. I understand the intention. The intention is good, but the underlying message is you're not good enough. And you are. Each and every one of you is good enough. So, yes, we have to internalize that. We have to teach ourselves to believe that we are good enough. But all these programs that send, to me, they just send the wrong message. But you know, it's hard, okay? I've worked all over the world. I have been exposed to every potential nuance of harassment, discrimination. I mean, really, I've been there. We've all been there. We can have a 5-hour conversation about this. I'm sure that we've all had similar experiences. I'm hoping, in fact, I know this. I know that my daughter will have an easier time. She has more opportunities. It doesn't even cross her mind that there's something she can't do. Okay? Because as far as she's concerned, she can do it, you know. With time it'll get better, but I think that the single most important thing we need to do is involve the men. That's what we need to do. The guys at the back of the room, they're the people who need to walk with us hand in hand to create that equality. We came here from a meeting at, where are you, Harriet? I can't see you. At the back. Harriet's company. And there was a long meeting room, and I sat on the one side of it, and on the other side was the management team, and there were 3 men and 3 women, and nothing could make me happier. Because at the end of the day, they understand that that's where the talent pool is. We gave a talk in Delhi, God knows when it was. Was it yesterday? Maybe it was the day before yesterday. I'm sorry, I've lost track of time. 2 days ago. Okay, 2 days ago. Gave a talk in Delhi at the Circle, so big entrepreneurship hub. And they asked me to talk about, well, similar subject. And lo and behold, there were more men than women in the room. So that makes me happy, because the women know they can do it. It's the men who need to take part in this, because, you know, women's rights are human rights. And it's for the benefit of society. It's not for the benefit of women. You're not doing it for your wife or your mother or your daughter. You're doing it for yourself and your son and father, all of us. So that, to me, that's the message. And the more we engage and involve, the more successful we'll be.
Yeah. So, I can go on, but we also decided, like, while you were speaking, that we should actually open up the stage for the audience to ask questions. So, please bring them on.
I'm happy to take questions or comments or thoughts or ideas. Maybe I learned something new. I like learning something new. Don't be embarrassed. Okay.
Well, so I'm going to continue.
Sure.
You made a very interesting point that men need to learn. I think over the past couple of decades, and that's my personal observation, you have different thoughts about it. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of programs around women empowerment and like women should do this, and there are programs specifically making the men aware. Because I was like, they just remain where they are because it's nothing to do with them. It was all about women learning how to, I'm confident, I can speak, I can do this, I can do that. And I'll tell you what I experienced with parity. And like what I've experienced, like I think at some level, and I mean, I possibly have personally also thought like that, if I become too successful, I will be liked less.
I'm very sorry to tell you that that is probably true. Still, and I hope it won't be true in the future, but we've all been there. We've all been there. And I'm sorry, terribly sorry to say, you may be liked less by men and women. Sorry, so sorry. I'm not good. You should probably switch off the camera. This is very politically incorrect of me. But look, we are going through a very big change, a societal change. When things change, they move around before they settle down. They never change incrementally in a nice, organized fashion. And it's not pleasant, but we have to accept that. This whirlwind, and it's hard for some people. And there are various forces. Today in Israel, unfortunately, we have ultra-religious forces that are trying to push back specifically against women. And sadly, some of those voices are female voices. It's something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. On the other hand, look at Iran. Iran abolished its morality police the day before yesterday. It's amazing, okay? And when you look at the riots, they were not all women. They started by women, but they were joined by the men because in the end it's for everyone's benefit. So I'm giving that just as an example of change. Change it's never neat and clean. Change is messy. But I think that we need to look a little beyond today and tomorrow and understand that we are making the world a better place for our children. And I say children, I mean our sons and our daughters. I have a son, I have a daughter. I want them both to live in the world that is more equal than it is now. Sure. I'm going to stand up because this is making a lot of noise. So no, I'll come closer to you.
Yeah. Very basic question. So what exactly you feel this gender equality and women empowerment is? Without understanding these definitions, I feel that nothing can be done. So this definition should be very clear.
Well, I'll give you a very, very, very short answer. Personally, I don't like the term women empowerment. Okay, sorry. I'm so politically incorrect today. But I'll tell you why. I don't need anybody to give me power from the outside. I have my own power, thank you very much. I don't need you to empower me. Just stay out of my way. I do just fine. And it's not just me. It's each and every one of you in this room, okay? When you say empowerment, there's something belittling about it. Like, you need to be sort of... that's not the case. The second thing is, what is gender equality? To me, it's equal opportunity. It doesn't mean we all do the same thing. It doesn't mean we all want to do the same thing. It does mean that we should have the opportunity to do the same thing. And you know what? It's true when you look at all human rights movements, okay? If you look at what happened in the US in the 60s with the African American community, at the end of the day, it's equal opportunity. What you do with the opportunity, that's already up to you. Not every woman wants to be a CEO. Not every woman maybe is suited to be a CEO. Not every man is. But I want to have the opportunity, okay? And we're dealing with, listen, we're not there yet. We're not there yet because we're dealing with so much unconscious bias. Let's first deal with the conscious bias. Then we deal with the unconscious bias, with the fact that, the things that people don't say, the things that people don't even realize that they're thinking, somewhere. You don't even realize. But you got to start somewhere. And that's why I said before, change is messy. Change takes time. Change is, sorry, move this just simply because it's making noise. I like the air, but it's making noise. The change, the air is good, but it's okay. The change, it's happening. Look, we're sitting here and talking about this. And I'll tell you something else. I think that many women of my generation, and I see, quite a few in the room as well, we didn't want to talk about this. I didn't want to talk about this, okay? Earlier on in my career, I worked very hard. I really worked very, very hard. And I thought, okay, I'm achieving things because I work hard. If you work hard, you can do the same thing. End of story, no problem. That was until I had children, at which point I realized it's a little more complicated than that. But also, I didn't want to be that person who complains. I didn't want to be that person who flags the fact that she's different, because I was always alone. I was always the only woman in the room. I'm still usually only the only woman in the room. So this is very nice. Thank you. And I think that at some point, many of us realized that it wasn't as simple as we wanted it to be, and that we're not there yet, and that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to the next generation, to our daughters, to our friends, to voice this, to speak up, and to help the change come along. And sometimes, yes, I'm a nuisance. I'm invited to speak at a conference. I'm the only woman on the panel. I say, no, thank you very much. Now, I know why they're inviting me, because someone told them they have to have women. So, you need one woman on the panel. Not good enough. 2 women out of 10, not good enough. What I do, but that's already a very personal style, it's a question of how you're comfortable. I find that I can make bigger change if I approach people and help them rather than complain about them. I'm not a big one for, writing posts on social media and saying, you should, no. But I'll call them up. Usually it's, people I know, and I say, listen, not good enough. Let me help you. What are you looking for? And I can usually point them in the direction of good people to stand on the stage. But it's time consuming and it's slow, but I can promise you that it won't happen again. Because once you plant that seed of awareness, then it's almost like you can't unsee it. The CEO of an organization that I'm on the board of, he said to me some time ago, he said, since you started talking to me about this, he says, I can't unsee it. So now it's like I look at something and I say, okay, I should have more women here, more girls, and that's also an educational organization, so it's particularly nice to know that he's aware of this. And he calls me when there's something, he says, look, we've done this, we've done that, and we've named the streets after women and whatever. But so it makes a change, certainly more of a change than if I stand up in a meeting and say, oh, you did this wrong. Nobody likes that. So I think we all have a responsibility to do that, and that's an answer to your question, in our own, wherever your sphere of influence is.
Yes.
Well, that and then. Okay, so we'll start with you and then you. It doesn't matter. I'll answer everyone, I promise.
Okay, woman is a wonderful gift of God, right? But woman is...
So are men, hey? I mean,
her mother. So I think, I don't know about the world, 90% of women has to sacrifice their careers,
Do they?
Yeah.
Let me ask you something.
Path according to the,
Okay, but most of us don't have children alone. So, no, it's happening. That's why I say most of us, not all of us.
I think that's happening, but like we are saying we are changing the world and we are getting into this. How long do you think this thing will be changed?
I don't know. I don't have. Promised I'd answer the questions. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. But I do know that we can't give up, okay? But I mean, I wasn't trying to be funny. That's a very serious point. To me, it's a very, very serious point. We don't have children alone, mostly. Very few cases, but on the whole, women don't have children alone, which means that there are two parents, which means that both parents need to be involved in raising their children. There's some things that only the mother can do, okay, if you're breastfeeding, whatever. Been there, done that, many years, by the way, and made many adjustments, including traveling all over the world with my children when they were babies because, you know, I did some strange things, but it was important to me, and I was at a point in my career where I was able to set those rules for myself. But having said that, each one of us makes her own choices and her own family choices within a family. I know a few families where, you know, there's a father who stays home or takes a bigger part in looking after the children. I'm not saying it has to go, by the way, I don't think that's the solution either, universally, because we don't want a reversal. You don't want children to grow up, as most of us did, with one very dominant parent and one parent who was hardly ever there. Okay? I think for children, it's, well, kind of nice to have two parents. It varies. It's not the same. If you say children are at home, you know, until the age of 18, more or less, okay? It doesn't mean 18 years of the same thing. It means there might be a period where you do more, there might be a period where your partner does more, there might be, you know, the various ways of solving this equation. But it starts with the understanding that children are not 100% the responsibility of the mother. And you know, that's where it starts. And from there on, we try and find the solutions. I actually have to say that, at least in Israel and many other countries, I am seeing a change. And I'm seeing the change from both sides. It's not just women who say, you know, I want to do things differently, but the men, the younger men, who say, you know, I want to have an active role in raising my children, right? So you're seeing that in India as well. So if both sides agree, now you sit down and find the way to do it. It's not easy. And that's why I think that companies, employers, have to take the responsibility for making their companies parent-friendly. Okay? Let's start talking about working parents, not working mothers. And it's a change of, it's not just semantics. And the men want it too. Believe me, I know this. I've spoken to enough young men, they want to be part of their children's lives. So that's my answer. Just a minute, we have a question here, and then...
I think that we will, after this question, we'll close, and then you can take questions offline now. This last question.
No, we'll take this and that, because I promised.
The kind of responsibilities women have nowadays, like work profile, then household chores, then you're creating awareness to kids, then teenage issues. There are many things that a women carries along with them. So this is my personal belief. I want to know your belief on it. I believe women are born CEOs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, the cliche that women are better at multitasking, in my humble opinion, is usually true.
Whether they have a work profile or not, they are CEOs.
No, it's true. I mean, after all, how many men do you know, if they're driving the car, they can't listen? Having said that, let's be careful with something, okay? When we talk about women being multitaskers and Wonder Women and Super Women and so on and so forth, we are doing ourselves a disservice, okay? Because you're letting the men off the hook. Oh, because he can't. Okay? And now he's making toast, so he can't put on the kettle. That's not good either, okay? I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny at all. Because if you want to really share responsibilities in the home and in the workplace, then it is my experience that men are actually quite capable. They're relatively competent. Surprise, surprise. No, but you know, I learned this. I have always traveled.
With this surprise.
No, it's very surprising, but you know what many, many women do? Most of us, I know I did it as well. When I traveled, okay, if I was traveling for work, oh, you should see the prep. And I was traveling almost every week, right? Lists and this. At 7:50, you take this child here. At 8:01, you do this. Here's the food. The freezer's stacked. Why? Why am I doing that? I'm doing that because at some level, I'm not willing to let go of the responsibility. At some level, maybe I don't want things to be done in a different way. I want them to be done my way. But you know, if you share, things will never be done your way. If you work in a team, your team members will do things their way. The important thing is that it gets done, okay? And in most, chances are your kids won't go hungry. They may eat some junk food, but you know what? The grand scheme of things, not the end of the world. They won't go hungry, they'll be reasonably clean, they'll probably go to school, you know? It won't happen in the way that you would have done it.
And actually, we're surprised that they may actually be better off.
And it's my experience that they manage. The kids manage, the other parent manages. And that's, if you ask me for ourselves, that's one of the things that we have to learn as well. We're so used to being CEOs that we try and manage everything, you know, even if it doesn't need to be managed, even if we're on the other side of the world. Some things will always come back to you, and that's fine, that's good, but I think that that's also, you know, it's an exercise in letting go a little bit and in sharing, and it's true everywhere. Think of it in the workplace, okay? It's an easier thing to think about. If you have a team, if you work in a team, very often, we were talking about this the other day, sometimes, you know, there's another person who's maybe less competent or maybe does things in a different way, and it's very annoying, and you say, oh, it's easier for me to do it myself, right? Yeah. Huh? So what happens? You'll always do it yourself because the other person will never learn. And you'll never let them learn how to do things because it's true, it takes less time to do it yourself. The first time, the second time, but you need to open up a little bit. Last question from the lady in white.
The comment is that firstly, I'm very, very happy to be here, and I think it's been very enlightening for everyone over here, you know, whatever you've been speaking about. I was actually going to my farm this morning, and when I saw I called up Anjum and said, can I come? Women in business innovation, very interesting. And Israel, you know, I'm probably one of the first few people, about 25 years ago, I started drip irrigation on my farm.
Wow.
I started the organic farming movement. I mean, I don't want to say how ancient I am, but I've done a lot of stuff. So I think you brought up some very valid, I mean, you know, you've enlightened everyone on a lot of valid points. Like, I love the idea of what you said. It's not about women empowerment. Everybody's empowered anyway. Why do we have to make a cliche of it, you know? Women empowerment. Even gender equality. I mean, see, I'm a spiritual life coach in the University of Hawaii. I lecture on consciousness and awareness. Also, I'm a columnist for more than 30 years. I feel that, I mean, I grew up with the belief that there is, no, I mean, that's more of a spiritual concept, that the spirit has no gender. So if you have it in you, if you have to go in you, if your spirit is kind of rich enough and powerful enough to feel the energy, you don't have to feel suppressed or oppressed or depressed about being a woman. I think we are allowing the men to overshadow us by, you know, giving ourselves that idea. So I think, I mean, everything you've been talking about, I could relate to everything so beautifully. I can keep going. Whatever, traveling around the world, I've done that for years, bringing up children, and
it always happens.
You are really, really good.
Thank you very much for that. I want to leave you with one final thought, okay, before I let you summarize. I want to leave you with one final thought, and it is this. Because we're not there yet, okay? Because it's a bumpy road. I look at this room, And I don't know how many of you know each other or meet each other, but I urge you to support each other. Okay? It's a sizable population of successful women in this room, and I do believe that any type of support circle is helpful. Even if it's just to say, oh God, you know, I've had the exact same experience. You get it out of your system, you move on. So it's a wonderful group here, and I hope that you use it, you know, just for business, for pleasure, for that support that you can give each other as you proceed on this road, which is not always an easy one. Thank you. And last comments for you.
So with that, I would like to invite Jyotika Singh, founder and CEO of Content.
Jitin wants to say something
Oh,
for
I'm
a
so
moment.
sorry.
A couple of hours because I can still see so many women wanting to share their stories. So much to talk about. It was a very enlightening session. And you made us fall in love with Israel, so thank you so much for that. And I'd like to have a special mention here to Jitin, Robin, Harit, Doron, for being the poster boys for women empowerment. I know you don't like the word, but this is a person, I was surprised Jitin when you asked that because you were one of the first people in the ecosystem. You should know the background that Jitin and Robin and Harit, they've been extremely supportive of my personal journey in time. I was the first woman in 20 years to become the General Secretary, cracked it in 20 years of this chapter. And it was very nice. I was really surprised when Jitin asked that question because he lives that. And of course, Gaurav, SK, when Bandhan, all of these men have been very generous in supporting and understanding that this is what women go through. They all have gender equity in their organization, very successful organizations, all of them are running. And personally, for me, this is one of the best sessions I've attended from time, a long, long time. So thank you so much for that as a woman entrepreneur. And on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for coming here. And thank you, Nava, once again. Thank you, Kalika. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Come
this side.
join us here. Yeah. Mind the coffee. I'll tell you something. This is known in Hebrew as the happiness tree. So there you go. I leave you with happiness. It was a great pleasure. And I hope to have an opportunity to come back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.